Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Book Passage. It's in this virtual event. It's my great pleasure tonight to welcome Deborah Madison. She is an author, chef, cooking teacher, former, or I guess recovering Zen Buddhist priestess, ordained, and the author of numerous cookbooks that have really changed, I think, the way that we eat in America. I mean, specifically, how we have sort of encountered vegetables and maybe America's slightly problematic relationship to vegetables, and has really brought us into this place now where we have surrounded with such bounty. She's here to talk about her memoir, An Onion in My Pocket. This is an amazing kind of personal work that I think both charts kind of the development of food and also her own personal kind of growth and journey to find her place in writing. She's the author of The Vegetarian Cooking for Everyone, Vegetable Literacy, In My Kitchen, Local Flavors, and the inimitably named This Can't Be Tofu. So without further ado, I'm going to kick it off and we'll be in conversation. My name's Avram, and I do some of the food and wine events here for Book Passage. So Deborah, thank you so much and welcome.
Thank you. Thank you. It's good to be here.
So I want to, this is a great journey, and I want to dive into the kind of like very beginning here and get a sense of your parents' cooking, because on one level, when you're reading this, you think they're like almost macrobiotic or something. There's no meat, there's all these whole grains and kind of early adoptions, things that we think of later. At the same time, you describe them as meat and potatoes people, your dad, and that there's like, exotic foreign meal dinners that they were hosting for friends. So tell us a little bit about.
Well, it's funny you said macrobiotic, because I would never think of my parents as being macrobiotic. They were more, my mom was a little bit stingy, I think, with the food budget more than anything. My dad was an Iowa boy, farm kid, and he did like his meat and potatoes, and he was a good cook. And they did, I grew up in a university town, UC Davis, and so everyone had sabbaticals, or they were going to take a sabbatical someplace, and they were familiar with these foods that were so foreign to most of us. And my parents, often gave parties where they featured them. The Time Life books, The World came out about during that time. And so they cooked from it, and it was fun for them. But it's true. We weren't vegetarian, by any means, but we didn't have a lot of meat. We had lamb burgers, which were very cheap, and we had the rustic parts of chickens, and we had a steak that was given to us by the university only once. And it was beyond me why anybody would like a steak. We had to fill out a questionnaire. Was it gray? Was it tough? Yes, it was gray and tough. And I have no idea what it was about now, but but my husband, for example, grew up in a household that had steak 3 times a week, and it probably wasn't grass fed. It was probably a corn fed steak, and he loves that. I'm indifferent to it, as he likes to point out.
So you grew up initially on a farm in upstate New York, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then transitioned out to the West Coast.
Yeah.
How did that change your eating, and do you think you connected to kind of local foods from that early?
Well, I think we all did, because California was so amazing. Oranges, for example, we had orange trees, and if we didn't have our own orange trees, there were orange trees that were around. And, so we suffered through a lot of really sour oranges for Christmas morning because they were from our trees, or they were local, even though they weren't quite ripe. Whereas back east, maybe I had an orange in my stocking, one orange, and it was wonderful. And I loved it, but yes, it was different. And growing up in California, oh my gosh, it was such a bounty for my parents, especially, I think. For me, I was a little kid, so I didn't really notice or care so much.
So one of the ways I think this that your path to food was through your path to Buddhism. And can you talk a little bit about like what prompted you to be a searcher in that way from a kind of spiritual place?
Oh, I'll try. I'll try to do that. It was a long time ago, but when I was in college, I wanted to study city planning, and I got a job at UC Berkeley after I graduated, and in city planning. And I went to see people who lived in a very enlightened, kind of wonderful uh, attempt at city planning. Instead of big high rises like in New York or someplace, they had low buildings, they had grassy lawns, they had laundry areas, they had games place for their kids to play, and they weren't happy. They were complaining all the time. So that made me really wonder, do I want to do this if no one's going to really be happy with it? And I decided not to in the end, although now I'm not so sure that was the smart thing to do. But at the time, I thought it was, So I had to deal with these other questions, like what was really at the root of, a person's life and their happiness, and why would they not be happy with this? I didn't understand. So then I went to Japan, and it all became clear that I had to practice.
And then the cooking part feels almost accidental. Like they went to the room and they said, like, who can do this? And you raised your hand.
Yeah, that's exactly what happened. My hand shot up, actually. I had no idea I wanted to cook, but I guess I did, want to cook, because I did it, and I did raise my hand, and I thought really it was the most interesting place to be in this community of people that was rather dour and somber in some ways. So I was happy to do it. And I had no idea about cooking brown rice or gamasho or making miso soup for 60 people. I knew nothing about this food. And I had to learn it from the beginning, from the ground up.
There's something about that I remember when Alice Waters was speaking here with us at Book Passage. She was talking about how the early days of Chez Panisse was everybody was almost an amateur. They were coming to it from a place of home cooks and investigating cookbooks and digging into that, but not this sort of elevated technical training. And in a lot of ways, I think that's your experience with it too. Do you think that kind of having to make it from scratch, as it were, kind of affected your relationship with food? And
I'm sure it did. I mean, I didn't know about cooking schools, and certainly women weren't invited to go to cooking schools at that time. So yes, it was a by scratch, by the seat of your pants kind of affair. Really, it was, and I don't regret that at all. It was interesting. Oh, it was hard too, to figure things out every single day, and specials and the weekends and the dinners and everything. But we'd managed to do it somehow. And it was a very exciting time to be cooking. I think everybody felt that way. It was de rigueur to have a mesquite grill, to make your own pasta, to cook with lots of cream and butter. I mean, it was a rich time, and chefs were discovering not only ingredients, such as those I just mentioned, and ways of cooking, but they were also discovering vegetables at that time, and they were just starting to look interesting, just starting.
I was thinking about that, reading about the beginning of greens and how, in some ways, it was so different than what was going on. I think of the restaurants of the 80s Bay Area as like Stars and this kind of, Jeremiah Tower went on to do, these sort of like extravagant, very showy kinds of things. And I almost think of greens as maybe, I don't know, having a sort of like slightly more humble kind of position in all of that.
Well, it was very down to earth. I mean, especially compared to Stars. Stars was amazing. I love to go to Stars, but it was pretty basic. I was just learning, about food, really, and we all were. It's kind of preposterous that it succeeded, really.
an amazing experiment though, but you guys got so much, I mean, the most outstanding location maybe in San Francisco. And then JB Blunk seats, and I mean, it kind of goes on and on and on, all the things you got right.
I know. And somehow we got the food right too, eventually.
Of course, yes, most importantly, perhaps. But I want to go back to like a little bit to like some of the food that you did prior to that. And talk a little bit about kind of when you were working in the really restrained place of like of things like, I mean, the chapter on gruel is you have to walk our audience through this a little bit.
I can't remember it exactly, but it was the dinner meal, the medicine meal, and it was usually just combined soup and rice and so forth from the day, and you could anticipate a good gruel. But might be beans and rice and cheddar cheese or something. That was good. Or you could anticipate a bad gruel, and a bad gruel would be something like miso soup, scrambled eggs, and it just things that didn't go together, that didn't make sense. But once you took it, you had to eat it. And what I found really interesting about it was going to a writers' conference where I was a teacher many years later up in Colorado, in the Arches National Park. And the chef there one day said, "I have a treat for you. It's called gruel." And I thought, oh no. And really, but it was interesting because it was polenta and it was kind of lukewarm and leftover, and there were some vegetables in it. And by the time you dug around and it was not too bad, but you could stop when you were full. You had enough. You didn't need to go on. And that was kind of one of the virtues of gruel, I think.
I think about that. I think about sitting there and anticipating as you eat and you meditate during the day, whether this is going to be a good outcome at the end of the meal or not. And I think that that's such a food-centric way that I think people that are interested in food think,
Yeah.
And I think all of us to a certain extent, there's that Tuesday night where you're like, okay, there's a little eggplant left over and there's this.
Yeah, that's what we had last night, leftover eggplant, actually. But no, you have to be kind of interested in food to anticipate the gruel and what's it going to be like. And I think I was kind of alone in that. Maybe other people did, but they certainly didn't talk about it. I don't know.
So before greens, and we get to you work at Chez Panisse a little bit, and there's these kind of two worlds, which I think is like the austere world of the Zen food that you were doing, and then this kind of more opulent world of what we think is like the burgeoning kind of gourmet movement happening in the Bay Area. And were those two things that kind of like tugged at you in different directions of kind of
away from Zen Center or something, you mean?
Well, not I mean away from Zen Center, but I mean in the sense that they seem to be two really different modes of looking at the world, but maybe they're not so different.
I don't know that they're so different or alike, and it didn't really tug at me too much. It didn't. I just went to work and at Chez Panisse and worked and came home and at the end of the day, and I didn't have to eat, of course, because it was the middle of the night, and so I went to bed, and that was that. Yeah. It didn't really bother me too much, this difference between them, because I was young and I had a lot of energy and I could do all that and make it work somehow in a way that I don't think you can necessarily when you're older or you're not so interested in it.
So then let's sort of fast forward, because greens was this sort of like rapid, crazy experiment. And then you end up like pretty shortly, 3 years, you finally get it up and off and it's on its own, and then you're done.
Well, I was sent to Tassajara, to our monastery, to be the head monk because it was my turn to do that. And then I wasn't wanted back at Greens, which was okay. I mean, it kind of hurt at first, but then I just went on to do other things. So it was all right. But it was kind of crazy in the beginning. And the person who took over made food that was very reliable and soft and could be scooped and served, and and then it got into brunch and all these other things, and the menus got beautiful and elegant, and whereas we just Xeroxed ours, and it was a very different experience. It really was. I was learning to cook, and I wanted to do very exciting things. And Jane Hirschfield, who was my sous chef at dinner, I think if she had known how thin the ice was we were skating on, she probably would have just blanched and said, "I'm not doing it." But she believed in me, and she did it. So.
And you were encountering, this is the time when lots of new ingredients were kind of flooding into, or maybe not flooding in, but we're coming into the scene, right?
Yeah, I mean, they're very different ingredients than we have now. For example, the sun-dried tomatoes from San Remo in Italy were fantastic, and Carlo Medione, gave us a gift of a jar, and they were so good. And I actually I can't stand that combination of goat cheese, sun-dried tomatoes, and pine nuts, which you see on everything. Ugh, it's too rich, it's too this, it's too that. But every time I'm in Italy and I see those tomatoes, I'm reminded of how wonderful it was. Yeah.
I was really struck about that glass market in the Mission that existed in San Francisco. And that was news to me.
Which market was that?
You described going there with your dad early in the book. That was this kind of like more sort of working class butchers and
oh, this, yes, I know what you're talking about.
Crystal Market, or
Crystal Palace Market. Mm-hmm. It's no longer there, unfortunately. Yeah.
So I was thinking about this, that where there's this sort of continuity of that, which is this sort of like old, almost going back to kind of the 20s and the 30s kind of way that America was shopping for food. And then you mentioned that, of course, the ferry building and what a Valhalla of food that is now, but in a kind of precious way. And then, of course, also the rise of farmers markets. And part of this book is chasing kind of farmers markets as that emerges as a real force in our culinary culture. And where do you feel about the state of the market now? Do you think that we're getting to better and better places? Do you think that we're kind of becoming precious? And I'd be curious to know
I think it depends on the market, probably. I no longer go into Santa Fe to our big farmers market. I go to one that's much closer to me. And there's, you don't really need 18 vendors to sell you zucchini. You just don't, especially if you grow it too. So I kind of am for small markets. But where we're going now, I don't know. I'm worried. I'm worried that the farmers are going to give up. They're going to, like the chefs have, and a lot of people who work in restaurants. It's hard to find people to fill the positions now. I'm sure that's true in Brooklyn as it is in Santa Fe. Yeah. So restaurants that used to be open all the time are just open at night, or they're closed on Mondays and Tuesdays, or something is different. It really, really is. And the farmers market, I think right now it's rich in terms of variety, but I don't know if it's going to manage to stay that way. I hope it will. I do hope we don't go backwards to 2 kinds of lettuce and 3 kinds of apples and no tomatoes or early bills.
Once you've had the Castelfranco, you can't go back. So.
No, you can't. It's hard to go back.
Did you find when you were traveling around doing the market book that you feel like, in some ways I feel like in this age of the internet that good food and awareness about ingredients and how to handle things is totally pervasive. It's like people are consuming more food culture in the form of books and videos and podcasts than I think at any other time. Do you think it's kind of penetrating in and we're changing our culture? Do you still think that there's kind of food?
I don't know exactly, because I'm not one of those people that's into that. I kind of wrote this to say I'm done with cookbooks and cooking for the most part, but except for our day-to-day kind of food. But I think a lot of people are very, very good with the toppings, the fine little details, and they're not very good with basics. And I hope that they're going to want to learn basics as well as the other things too, at some point. That's why we write cookbooks, and that's why we really do, write them for that reason, to encourage people.
When you went back and you revised your cookbook, what struck you? Were there things that you do differently that you
Well, I never make stir fries. I've never been a stir fry person because I was in San Francisco, so I mean, why make a stir fry? You just go to, there's a million Chinese restaurants that are really, really good at that. So I took a lot of the stir fries out, and I thought they were too complex. They were too difficult. They're not an easy kind of thing to make. And I replaced them with vegetable sautés, which is what I tend to do. For example, I was giving a talk once, and I said, I'm going to take out recipes that are too rich, like the sizzling risotto gratin. And these women said, oh no, you can't take that out. We love to make that for our birthdays, for each other. So, I thought, okay, I'll leave it in. And I did. But it's good to have things that are special and rich and complex, along with things that are simple and doable and everyday kinds of foods. So that's what I did.
What kind of things do you cook now that are different than maybe were part of your repertoire in all these days that are new elements?
Well, I during the pandemic, I cooked for my books actually, which was different for me because I never, cookbook authors hardly ever get to use their books. So that was fun. It really was. And I was surprised always how good things were and how simple. My husband will say things like, let's have a corn dog. I'll say, a corn dog? What's a corn dog? I've never had a corn dog. So I looked it up on YouTube and I made him a corn dog. It looked a little like a chili relleno, but it was good, it really was. And he said, how about fried chicken? Can we do that? I said, okay, I'll look that up too. I had it before that Edna Lewis had made, and it was wonderful. So I looked it up, and we had fried chicken. And then all of a sudden he said, as a former vegetarian, I think we're having too much meat. Let's just have more vegetables now. So,
yeah, the corn dog will do that to
you. Yeah, so a fried chicken.
Let's talk about that a little bit. Like, how did you, when you did come to the point that you decided to stop being a vegetarian, or were you ever kind of strict?
No, I never was. I've never, ever, ever gotten on the platform and said, you should be a vegetarian. It's the best way. I just wanted to, actually, I wanted to call this book My Vegetarian Problem originally, because it is a problem. I'm classified that way no matter what I do. Even with this book, people still think I am. So I am, I guess, for them. But I never really was a vegetarian, and the meals at the end are illustrative of what happens if you can drop your shtick, and just go with what's served. And sometimes it's meat, sometimes it's not. It doesn't matter really what it is if it's done with kindness and thoughtfulness and qualities like that. So that's important to me, much more so than having a diet. In fact, I'm really, people have said, what would you like this book to do? And I always say, I'd like people to relax a little bit about their diets, because it's understandable why they get them, because the promises are so great, that they're going to be beautiful, they're going to be this, they're going to be that, and the other thing. But they all fail in the end. You're just yourself. And so you might as well just let it go sometimes and, join in everybody else, what they're eating, what they're doing.
Try to enjoy a little bit.
Right. Yeah.
How did the books start up for you? Like, how did that become the natural pivot?
Well, the book started actually a long time ago, 15 years ago. I had a fellowship to Hedgebrook Writers Colony in Washington State. And I was there for a month, and it was really painfully hard because at that time, I really felt like I should get a PhD in something to be more useful in the world. And so
family
what
of
I
botanists.
so what I wrote, and I read it a year later, it was so moany, groany, and awful. I thought, oh, it's terrible. I certainly a PhD or no. I mean, this book is sour. It's not good. So then I kind of worked at it every now and then I actually just wrote it to see where it was going, because I by now I don't think I'll probably get a PhD in anything. But I come from a family of academics. They have all the PhDs that our family needs right now. So I don't know where I was going with that, but anyway, I just stopped and started it afresh, wrote it to the end to see what it was about, because I didn't know where I was going. I just felt like I needed to tell my story, tell the story of greens a little bit. And because it was very, very interesting to me, actually, that part of the book was very interesting. The menu that we did, how people don't eat that way anymore, that food is so transient and stylish and it changes and all those things.
The anxiety of cheese.
Yeah. Well, it was hard having a vegetarian restaurant at that time because, people, the women were fine. They'd come for lunch. And then when we opened for dinner, they dragged their husbands in. And I thought, oh no, what am I going to make for them? But they want a steak. It's Friday night and Saturday night, and they were the people I really, really worried about, concerned my book with, my efforts with.
But I think I think people were turned on to it, right? I mean, obviously it's been a huge success. I mean, Greens is still there.
Yeah.
But I think also like I was the beginning of our culture kind of grokking to this sort of way of eating, to, I mean, plant-based diets, all of these things that we take for granted now and that are almost advertised at us. This was the very start.
Yeah, it's true.
Did you have people come back to you and be like, Deborah, oh my God, this is...
Well, people appreciated the food, I think. And they'd often come in the kitchen and say, oh, that was the best meal I ever had. And I'd say, oh, you're kidding. Surely you had better. I would think that to myself. And then as I said in the book, I'd understand that what they were experiencing was very different from what I was experiencing. Sore feet, heat in the kitchen, all of that. They were in a beautiful dining room. They were maybe being proposed to or something like that. So they were there under very different circumstances.
Do you think it was a strength? I mean, it kind of goes back to my earlier question, but that this was all kind of a big experiment and let's figure it out. Then in a way that if you had a more formal training or all these things, you would have been constrained into thinking what you could put with what and what belonged where and all of those kind of considerations.
Yeah, I think so, probably. I mean, it was a big wacky experiment, and I mean, we just did it. We did it, and it was hard. Lunches weren't so hard, but the dinners were really hard once we started doing those. I can't imagine doing brunch and meals like that, which I don't ever eat. I don't really like brunch. I don't understand brunch. But there it is. Somebody else put it on the menu. They did it.
The craziest thing I think is reading that you did it all with amateur cooks, with conscripts at the Penn Center.
Yeah, a lot of people didn't want to be there, and they made, and I didn't blame them. I didn't always want to be there either. I mean, yes, it was exciting and wonderful and all of that, but it was hard physically. And sometimes I just want to be a Zen student again. And that's how these younger people felt. And I didn't blame them. I understood how they felt, but it was hard. They didn't make it easy to pull off doing a dinner, when we were also amateurs, as you say. And we were.
Well, I mean.
Oh, we were. We were.
And then kind of that you step away from greens, and that sort of precipitates the beginning of you stepping away from the Bay Area at large, right? And
Yes, I think it did. Yeah, when after I was the Shuso and I came back from Tal Sahara and I wasn't wanted at Greens anymore, I decided to leave. I mean, I went back and worked at Chez Panisse many times over a 10-year period, but finally I did leave and it felt great. It just felt so good. I was ready to go at a certain point. And then after I left, I got a job offer that had I stayed, I probably would have taken, but no, I went to Flagstaff and then to Santa Fe and then to where I live now in Galisteo, New Mexico.
what was the call to the desert?
I don't know. I had to go somewhere. And I mean, I really miss California. And even though it's burning up and it's a very different place than what I grew up in and what you grew up in, apparently. I miss California. I miss it. It's my home. What can I say?
Yeah, I think across this memoir, it's almost the lover left behind, or the road sort of untaken, in that sense. Talking about California citrus and the growing season as you struggle with the short growing season in New Mexico.
Oh, it's so hard. There's either no water or it freezes or it bakes or something happens. It's just not easy to grow things here. I remember seeing my brother, who's a farmer up in the Winters Davis area, walking around with some big old, what they were cottonwood trees, and he just stuck them in the ground. And then I came back and they were cottonwood trees. And, you know, things grew, they grew so fast. And here it takes 3 years to figure out if something's going to make it or not. You know, it sleeps, it creeps, and then it maybe leaps. But that, you don't know.
And I heard that you worked for James Turrell, the artist, for a while when you came out west.
I did work for Turrell. Where'd you hear that?
It's in your book.
Oh, it's in my book. Okay. Yes. Yeah, I know the book. I've got a copy too. I forgot that I mentioned that. It's been a while. And you asked good questions that nobody else seems to know. But he actually was my cousin by a former marriage. And so I worked for him. And then the man I'm married to now also worked for him. And we did it together.
So I just want to tell, we're going to continue on with the conversation, but please, everyone, there is a portal for questions in the YouTube video that you're watching. So please submit some questions, and we'll have a Q&A with Deborah towards the end of the event. But I look forward to seeing your audience questions. Yes, it's in the YouTube chat. I was struck by that because I thought there's this whole transition from all the world of food that you're doing in this whole community of the Bay Area, and you come out and you're working in art and in the desert, and it's this pretty profound shift.
Well, but I was always interested in art. You know, I went to art school and I'm married to an artist. And actually one of the wonderful things about writing this book is that I talked about Dave Gilhooly and Bob Arneson. And a woman called me and she said, I've got some pieces from you. I used to be married to Roy DeForest. And now I live way, way up in Northern California, by Likely, California. And so she sent me these 2 pieces of a cow sandwich that Dave Gilhooly made and a cup of coffee that has a mountain in it that Arneson made. So, you know, these things have a way of coming into your life. They do.
And so this is the period of time where you start writing cookbooks as well, right?
Yeah. I did. I wanted to write the Greens cookbook, and then I discovered I really liked writing, you know, so I went on to write all these other books. And then I thought maybe I should write a book without any recipes in it at all and go on from there. But still, food, where it comes from, has always been important to me, to understand, to know, to write about, to talk about. Yeah.
And the sense kind of memory of food. I was really surprised when you get to the end of the book and you say, I remember almost none of these meals. And then of course you recount these many varied, beautiful meals.
Well, yeah, that's true. I had to work at it though. I thought, what do I remember really? I mean, yes, 3-star meals, 4-star meals in France, of course, you always remember because they're meant to shock and awe, and they're wonderful that way. But that's not what I wanted to write about. I wanted to write about more ordinary kinds of meals that really made an impression on me. And since writing that book, I've thought of others too that happened. That's not all of them, but they're profound for me.
I'm curious if some of the feedback that you get from people who use your cookbooks, and you mentioned touring and all these people coming up to you with their sort of responses and their favorite recipes. Are their favorites your favorites too? Are they the savory tarts? Are they
Well, I mean, I like all this food that I've written about and made recipes for. I really do. I've never made recipes that I don't like in particular. The stir fries I was never crazy about, perhaps. That would be the only one really kind of food. But yeah, it's different, isn't it?
Do you have a favorite? I mean, I know this is an impossible question to ask. A favorite recipe of yours?
Well, I have a couple of favorites, and actually, it's not an impossible question, and I wish I had more. But I just had some people for dinner the other night, and I made the eggplant gratin with a saffron ricotta custard, which I used to make at Greens. And that's the dish I mentioned that I used to add cheese to because I was so insecure about people feeling fed at that time. But I've modified it and gone back to the original recipe, which is actually not mine. It's from Richard Onley, who's a wonderful cook and a cook's cook, I think. And I love that recipe. It's always good. When we made it at Greens, we used fresh tomatoes. So there was always a sauce, from the tomatoes itself, which you'd want to serve rice or something like a grain with. Here we don't have fresh tomatoes except for 3 weeks of the year, and they're so expensive, So a lot of times I'll make it with canned tomatoes, and it makes a different dish completely. You can actually slice it and serve it sometimes. If it, this one I made was a mixture of fresh tomatoes from the garden and some canned tomatoes. So it didn't quite do either one, but it was fine. It was delicious. And that's what we had left over last night. So that's one I really, really like. Actually, I like all the recipes from In My Kitchen a lot. I didn't style them. Somebody else did. So they don't always look the way I would make them, but nonetheless, they taste fine and they're good.
I love the story that you have in the book about the poor woman who's with the ruler out.
Oh yeah. Yes. Should I tell that story?
Yeah, please do, because I think it's every cookbook author's nightmare.
Oh, I know. I mean, that's what really wanted me to give up completely then. So I worked for the California Artichoke Board for a while. And I did a number of recipes, and I'd gone to the Midwest where there was a big series of magazines and so forth. And I saw this woman out of the corner of my eye as I was being given a tour, with a ruler, and she's checking everything twice. And finally I realized she's prepping my recipe. And I went over to her and I said, "Oh, I see you're prepping my recipe. That's wonderful. Thank you so much. And by the way, you can leave these odd pieces in. It's fine." And she said, "Oh no, it says a square or this or that, so I'm going to do it that way." So she made it look like frozen food, basically. And I just despaired, at that point of what on earth do you say? You have to say something. You have to say 1/8 of an inch, 1/4 of an inch, something like that, to give it a ballpark figure. On the other hand, to throw everything away because it doesn't fit, then you end up with something that looks mechanical, and it's just not the way it is.
Has your cookbook writing changed in that way? Like the way, and I guess this is sort of a technical question, but in that sense of how you prompt people to cook. And I have noticed, I think, a change in just more generally the way sort of ambiguities of cookbook writing, where things have become a little bit both more precise in the sense sometimes there's grams or something, but also a little bit looser in the sense of giving people a dash of pepper, this, kind of more
Right,
free
right.
reign what they're.
I think the important thing is for people to taste, and that way they find out how much salt they want, how much pepper they want, how many herbs they want. Do they want a handful? Is your hand big? Is your hand little? That kind of thing makes a difference. But I think, yes, it did affect my cookbook writing in that I quit because I discovered, I just thought everyone's stove is different, their pans are different, everything is different. If you try to cover all the bases, you end up spending 15 pages on something very simple, and where it should be something very, easy to do, like a custard, for example, a creme brulee. You can make it really hard, or you can make it seem really easy. But I give cookbook writing classes, and where I talk about that, because some people like to be very specific and very onward and upward in their feeling, and other people are more relaxed, and they just say, oh, some of this, some of that, don't worry about it. If you want this, substitute, go ahead, it's fine.
If you've ever read the comment section in the New York Times recipes, you know that it's suggestion at best is what you have going on.
Right. And well, I haven't read those, but I can imagine them very well. And
fabulous.
Yeah.
I replaced the chicken with eggs, and I replaced the curry with,
Yeah, right. And gee, it didn't turn out, or it was really great or something.
Yeah. Well, I want to open this up to some questions from the audience that we have. D. Petri asks, please talk about heirloom beans, especially in New Mexico. How do you support them, and where do we find them, and are they really different?
Well, that's a very interesting question. I think a lot of beans kind of are similar, and they're not really a dramatic difference, except in how they look, perhaps. And I remember once a woman grew some heirloom beans out, and we all loved the looks of this purple bean, but we didn't like the taste. It was very muddy. So, we had to say to her, we don't like that one. But we loved the way it looked. Heirloom beans how do I get them? Where do I get them? They often come in my CSA. I get bolita beans, black beans, but black beans are a more recent bean, except for the Valentine black bean. I had a hairdresser here once whose mother had a pen pal in New York who was Cuban, and they used to exchange beans, and that's how she got black beans, from this person back east. So I don't know how that really pans out here. What do I do to support them? I just cook them. We have beans. I think Steve Sando has done a wonderful job.
Rancho Gordo, my.
Yeah. And I've known him for a long time when he was just starting out and growing chilies and selling at the farmer's market and in Marin or wherever it was and so forth. But no, he's done a wonderful job. And New Mexico doesn't have really so many heirloom beans. The pinto bean was introduced by the Americans, to the Indians and to the Hispanics. So it's not really the native bean, but it is a bean that's grown a lot here.
I have a question. Do you have a restaurant that is your place, that when you walk through the door, you are known and they bring you a glass of wine without even asking?
Oh, I used to, but I haven't been to a restaurant in so long, and now it's too late because we're all masked up again, so I don't know. No, right now I don't. I'm afraid. I would love to have such a place.
We have, what are the pleasures of the table in your household? Lots of cooks talk about making food to facilitate people coming together and sharing their lives. Is that at the heart of it for you, cooking?
Well, I think it might be if it weren't for the pandemic. You
Hmm.
know, we haven't had that much company. But one thing that I have noticed is on Friday nights in the winter, we have baked potatoes. And people love to come over for baked potatoes. I don't know what it is. I never had one myself growing up, but they love baked potatoes and they'll bring a topping or two and so forth. And
Okay.
now it's BLTs because we happen to have a hot summer and tomatoes for a little bit more than usual. And it won't last very long, but people say, oh, BLT? Yeah, I'll be there.
Oh yeah.
So yeah, I don't know. I mean, otherwise, it's just cooking for two of us and it's pleasures of the table. I don't know. We're so different, and my husband and I, in terms of food, we are.
It seems to be consistent of your other husband too, right? You were also kind of polar.
Well, he's a foodie. I mean, he is really into it. Patrick, who I'm married to now, is not so much. I mean, he's the kind of person who you can say, "Would you like more souffle?" He'll say, "No, thank you. I'm full." I said, "What? You're full?" So we now have it fried for breakfast in butter, and it's not the same at all. It's kind of heavy and sodden, but it's good. Not
Right.
gonna throw it out.
Amazing restraint. Uh,
But I'll usually go for the seconds, whether I'm hungry or not.
a couple of the questions that are specific. What is your favorite thing to do with sweet potatoes?
Well, aside from making them every day for my dog, which I do that. I just cooked a whole bunch of them this morning. With sweet potatoes, I love them with a miso sauce, just roasted black sesame seeds. Um, I often, because I'm used to steaming them for our little labradoodle, um, I'll steam them for ourselves too if they're organic, and we'll just have them with butter, salt, and pepper, and they're awfully, awfully good. Sweet potatoes are delicious. Um, I know you probably want a better answer than that, but but I really, I mean, in my book, in my kitchen, there is a picture of sweet potatoes that have a drizzle of that miso sauce and black sesame seeds that I love, and it's really good. So they can go in lots of different directions. The butter direction, is good with sweet potatoes, or the other direction, the Asian direction, is good too.
Deirdre McCrowan asks, I ate at Greens in 1980 and it was one of the best meals I've ever had as an omnivore. Any suggestions for rhubarb?
Rhubarb. Oh, that's interesting. My very first television appearance was on Regis Philbin with rhubarb, and it came out looking beautiful, but it looked gray going in because the person who cooked it had cooked it in an aluminum pot. But so I love rhubarb. I love it stewed with raspberries. Like right now, my raspberries are coming on. There's still a little rhubarb. If you travel, you might find rhubarb stalks that are very long in the end of the season, in September even, and try them with different fruits. Otherwise, I think they'd be great as a savory addition to fatty meats and things because they're so sharp, being a member of that family, Polygonaceae. And they just are very, very sharp in taste. Uh, I I like to caramelize them sometimes with a little bit of sugar, but we don't do that so much now. We don't have so many desserts.
And did you learn to cook when you were a child? Were you exposed to different foods at a young age? And did this influence your career as an adult? This is
Not
kids
really.
for life.
Not really. I mean, I was a farm child, and I don't even remember what we ate. I just remember butter from our cows that was really, really good. And probably cheese would have been too. And it made me appreciate that part of the menu. Um, uh, Here comes my dog right now. No, he can't come in. That's why the door's closed. Because I can't get up and let him in.
Good.
Anyway.
Sweet potatoes.
Anyway, my husband always neglects this part of the Zoom thing when it's during dinner. So did I grow up being introduced to a lot of tastes? No, not really. When we came to California, of course, it was different because everything was delicious. We went to the nut tree, which is no longer, unfortunately, but they had beautiful food. For my parents, it was quite something, I think, to go from the cold northeast to the wonderful land of California. Although they didn't appreciate it. My mom didn't appreciate it right away.
Ask the one ingredient you could not live without, either as an eater or a cook.
Olive oil, probably. My brother makes olive oil and I love it. It's so delicious. I was thinking avocados because I eat a lot of avocados. Every day I have a piece of avocado. I always buy a couple when I go to the market, a couple times a week. Doesn't matter. I always have avocados. So those are foods that I couldn't live without, probably. Olive oil and avocados, but not necessarily together.
Now, without olive oil, and maybe no meal. Do you have a favorite Hatch chili pepper dish? I love Hatch chili, says Karen.
No, I don't. I actually like our chilies up here in the north that are more, hi Dante, he came in, he just opened the door. I like our chilies, which are twisty and gnarly looking, and they're really, really good. And right now they're just being roasted probably at the farmer's market, along with the Hatch chilies, which are on every corner, at this time of year. If they have the people to cook them, I pick them rather, that's the real problem right now.
What do you like to do with them then, once you have?
With the chilies?
Yeah.
Well, I love them stuffed. A chili relleno is delicious, but it's a lot of work to cook with chilies, in some ways. I like a salsa, of course, roasted chilies take off the skins, chop them up, maybe do some tomatillo, some cilantro, put it all together. That's delicious. But I'm not a New Mexican cook, really. I have to. I'm ashamed to admit that, but
30 years.
Somebody else cooks it. I'm a New Mexican eater of our food, but I'm not a preparer of it.
Tell us a little bit about your dislike of bowls.
Of bowls? Oh, God. I think they're so infantile. I mean, I'm sure they were developed to accommodate the iPhone camera from above, because it looks so great. But they all have an egg and they're all the same. It just seems to me, especially if you eat it with a spoon. I can't imagine that this is a very sophisticated dish. I really can't. Sorry.
I liked the one of the things you described that was in the Zen eating, this kind of build in intensity and smaller portions.
Mm-hmm.
Is that something that you think played its way out through your cooking career in other contexts, and maybe the way you think about meals now?
Well, I think that all people understand that, that when something's really complex and intense, you don't want to eat a lot of it. You can't have a big bowl of it, even if you want it. You think you might want it. You just can't. It's too much. So it's the little bowl. The medium-sized bowl is for something that's a little more flavorful than the big bowl, but it's also more neutral, like a soup or something. And the big bowl is for very neutral food. And in the winter, when you hold it and it warms your hands, you're glad. You really appreciate that what's in it too. But I think that's part of all cuisines, really.
Helena Paisley asks, do you have a favorite cookbook author? You are mine, hands down.
I didn't hear the last part. I'm sorry.
You are hers, hands down, her favorite author. But she wants to know if you have one that.
Oh, if I have one? Well, I have a lot of cookbooks. I love Judy Rogers' cooking. I love the Canal House Girls, Christopher Hersheimer. I like her cooking. I like Ottolenghi's a lot because he cooks very much the flavors that I like. Oh, I have a stack of cookbooks behind me, which I don't even know if you can see right now, but I don't have one favorite. I love Paula Wolfert recipes, and I love her Mediterranean grains and greens, and the food of Eastern Mediterranean. I love that food. I have a Turkish cookbook that a Turkish relative gave to me, which I really treasure because I've been to the restaurant that it's from. Things like that. You know, I'm all over the map.
So what's next now that you've put down cookbooks, you're done?
Well, what's next, I think, is a theme that came out of this book for me, which was 72 labors brought us this food. And I want to write about certain foods like dates or endive is a two-part vegetable, because it is a vegetable that grows leaves and then is whacked off and then the roots are dug up and so forth. So I want to write about a lot of vegetables like that and fruits.
Wow, looking forward to it. Deborah, thank you so much for this conversation. I want to encourage everybody to go out there and get the book. Onion in my pocket. I don't know if you can see it with this light. Thank you so much. And you can dive into all of these stories even deeper than we've been able to touch on today. But Deborah, thank you so much.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Thank you all for joining us and have a great night.